I want to talk to you today about three questions to ask when you hit a wall. In almost any project you endeavor, you'll kind of inevitably hit a wall. I hit a wall last week, a couple of weeks back. Now we went to the Grand Canyon. Been there many times before, several times before, and this just never could get quite enough of it. So this time we decided to spend the full day there. One day as tourist, and then another day I hiked about 3 miles down. In fact, if you ask me, what was the highlight and what was the low light of your vacation? I would say the highlight was walking 3 miles, 2,000 feet in elevation down, about halfway down into the Grand Canyon. That was the highlight. Do you want to know what the low light of the trip to the Grand Canyon was? Anybody figure it out? Usually, when I've told this to people, somebody can figure it out, and that is walking up 2,000 feet elevation, 3 miles back up. I hike a fair bit, and I thought I knew what I was biting off there. But usually, I hike mountains, and when you hike a mountain, you do the hard part when you're fresh. You do the hard part when you're strong. You do the hard part when you're not tired. But when you hike down in a canyon, you do the hard part when you're tired. And I bit off a little more than I could chew, and I hit a wall. And I want to talk to you today about three questions you might ask when you hit a wall. You go to try to lose some weight, you're going to hit a wall. You go to try to get out of debt, you're going to hit a wall somewhere along the line. I asked some of my pickleball friends, you hit a wall? And they told me about running. And I've never run a marathon, but anyway, you run a marathon, you can hit a wall, as this video here shows. But in almost any endeavor, somewhere along the line, you're going to hit a wall. I think I showed you this graph a few weeks back, but this is the graph of baptisms in the Southern Baptist Convention. And it's clear that we have hit a wall as a denomination, and our churches have hit a wall, and we need to do some things differently as a result of that. So, three questions to ask when you hit a wall. And here's our key verse. And then we'll look at the context. When they could not find a way to do this because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and lowered him on his mat through the tiles into the middle of the crowd, right in front of Jesus. That's our key verse. Let's look at the overall context. Wednesday, Jesus was teaching, and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were sitting there. They had come from every village of Galilee and from Judea and Jerusalem. Galilee up in the north, Judea and Jerusalem down in the south. And the power of the Lord was with Jesus to heal the sick. So men came carrying a paralyzed man on a mat, and they tried to take him into the house to lay him before Jesus, but they couldn't because they hit a wall. And when they could not find a way to do this, our key verse again, because of the crowd, they went up on the roof, lowered him on his mat, through the tiles, into the middle of the crowd, right in front of Jesus. Now, I remind you that this roof was not like our roofs. It looks more like the roofs in the Philippines. There's a picture of a roof in the Philippines. And they didn't look quite like this, but the point is, it wouldn't have been as much destruction as it would be one of our roofs to tear through one of their roofs. When Jesus saw their faith, presumably all of their faith, this passage doesn't say, by the way, but one of the parallel passages points out there were 4 men, so 5 altogether, counting the paralytic men. So when they saw all of their, I take it to mean all of their, the friend's faith and the man's faith, when Jesus saw all of their faith, he said, "Friend, your sins are forgiven." The Pharisees and the teachers of the law began thinking to themselves, "Who is this guy? Who is this fellow who speaks blasphemy? Who can forgive sins but God alone?" And by the way, were they right about that? Were they right that only God, I cannot forgive your sins against God, only God can forgive sins? Well, they were right about that. What were they wrong about? They were wrong about concluding that Jesus was not God of very God, not sort of God, not kind of God, not almost God, but God of very God. Jesus knew what they were thinking, and he asked, "Why are you thinking these things in your heart?" Which is easier to say, "Your sins are forgiven," or to say, "Get up and walk"? But I want you to know that the Son of Man, me, has authority on earth to forgive sins. So he said to the paralyzed man, "I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home." Immediately, he stood in front of them, took what he had been lying on, and went home praising God. Everyone was amazed and gave praise to God, and they were filled with awe and said, "We have seen remarkable things today." So, 3 questions to ask when you hit a wall. And I want to illustrate this by looking at some misquotes of this passage. All right, so this is misquote number 1, and see if you can see what I'm trying to tease out as far as the first question to ask when we hit a wall. When they could not find a way to do this because of the crowd, well, they just gave up and went home. The paralyzed man spent the rest of his days unforgiven and unhealed. Is that what it says? Well, of course, is not what it says. And so, look at that. We ask the question, what do we learn about a question we might ask based on that misquotation there? Let me give you a second one. The second misquotation goes like this: when they could not find a way to do this because of the crowd, They kept trying and trying, pushing and pushing, doing the same things, expecting different results. Is that what it says? Well, of course, that's not what it says. What does it say? It says, when they could not find a way to do this because of the crowd, they went up on the roof, lowered him on his mat, through the tiles into the middle of the crowd, right in front of Jesus. And it reminds me of points to three questions. And the first one is this: should we give up? Now, they concluded they shouldn't give up, but I think we ought to ask that question: should we give up? And right away, we will tend to think, well, no, we shouldn't give up. We want to know it, never, 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 never give up. And let's look at what the Bible says. Certainly, it says in some places, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest. When? If we don't give up. So don't give up. Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and never, 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 never give up. We're told a lot about perseverance, which is essentially not giving up. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance. That's the quality of not giving up: perseverance, character, and character, hope. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance. Let us not give up. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. On the other hand, we read, when Jesus sent his disciples out, he said to them, if anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave. Give up on that town, is the Josh Hunt paraphrase. Give up on that town, leave that home or that town, and shake the dust off your feet. And there's certain things that are not working, and you ought to just give up on them. Paul has this classic Macedonian vision. During the night, Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him. They tried to go this way, and God said no, and they tried to go that way, and God said no, and they tried to go another way, and God said no. And now they had this vision, and it's come over to Macedonia and help us. After Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding, and I love that word right there because a lot of people, as I talk to them about following God, the word is not concluding, it is certainty. I had this certainty that God said to do this, that, and the other. In my experience in following God is often concluding. It looks like this is what we ought to do. And what they ought to do in this case is they ought to give up. They ought to give up on evangelizing modern Turkey and they ought to go over to Europe. And sometimes they ought to give up. Now, in the case of these men, they concluded not to give up. But I think you ought to ask the question, should we keep doing this? Are we beating our head against a wall? And maybe this is something we should not do at all. Paul said, I will stay on in Ephesus until Pentecost because why am I going to stay in Ephesus? Because a great door of effective work has opened to me. And the implication is if there were not a great door of effective work, if I weren't getting some fruit, some results from my activity, then I might just do something else or go somewhere else or quit what I'm doing. And there's a place and time to give up. Seth Godin wrote this classic book, The Dip, a few years back, and he says most of the time we deal with obstacles by persevering. Sometimes we deal with it by not giving up. True enough. Sometimes we get discouraged and we turn to inspirational writings like stuff like Vince Lombardi, quitters never win and winners never quit. Bad advice. Winners quit all the time. They just quit the right stuff at the right time. I think about my own life. And when I was in high school, I felt called to ministry and thought of myself as a musician at the time. So I thought I'd be a music minister. And so I went to Wayland Baptist College to study music. And about halfway through my time there, I felt like I need to quit doing music. I felt the call of God out of music. It's really not a call into anything as much as a call to quit something. A few years back, my wife started working on her master's, and I thought, all my life I've thought about getting a D-Min. And she's going to be working. She's going to be tied up on studying all the time with her master. So I'm gonna work on my education some more. I'm gonna get a D-Min. And I actually went through the process of applying and so on, and was accepted, and was about ready to start. And then it hit me. You know what? What do I need a D-Min for? I mean, look at me, my age, where am in life. I don't think the cost benefit is going to work out on that. And I quit. Never one day, one moment have I ever regretted quitting music, and never one day, one moment have I ever regretted quitting getting my D-Min. Now, for some of you, that may be the thing to do to further your education. But for me, best thing I ever did was to quit. I got back into tennis a few years ago. I played tennis in high school and sometimes somewhat sporadically over the course of my life. And a few years back, I decided I'm gonna get serious about tennis. In fact, I had this goal. I thought I'm going to be the best over 65-year-old tennis player in Las Cruces. And I quickly learned that was never going to happen. There's a whole lot of people much better athletes than me. But I found after about 5 years of doing that I felt like I was just sore all the time. Something about stopping and starting on that tennis court, it wasn't good for wasn't working for me, and I quit. And sometimes the best thing that you can do is quit. Now, these men didn't quit. I think I can picture them getting in a little holy huddle say, you know, what are we going to do here? We tried to get to the crowd, and the crowd wouldn't let us through, and we could blame the crowd, and we could get mad at the crowd. We could get back. We could keep trying to do the same thing, expecting different results, or we could quit and we could just go home, and our friend would be paralyzed the rest of his life. But they said to themselves, no, 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 no. For us, quitting is not an option. But I think the first question we ought to ask is, should I quit? And sometimes the answer is, yes, I ought to quit. Second question we ought to ask ourselves is, should we keep trying? And so we just try harder. I can imagine one of those guys in that little holy huddle there thinking, you know what, I played on the Jerusalem football team and I was a center for the Jerusalem football team. And you just let me be the center of this organization here, and you guys get behind me, and we'll figure out a way to carry our paralyzed man, and we'll just ram our way through, and we'll just keep trying to do the same things, and we'll get different results simply by trying harder. And sometimes that's the thing to do. Sometimes that's what that word perseverance we looked at just a moment ago, sometimes that's what it means. But sometimes that is just an exercise in stupidity. Saw this clip from a Christian film. I'm not going to show you all to it. I showed about 5 minutes to my people this week. I'm going to show you about 1 minute of this. And this is the message that we often get.
You keep going. Go run. 10 more steps. 10 more. 10 more. 10 more. Keep going. Don't quit. Give me yours. You can. You can. 5 more. 5 more. Come on, Brock. Come on. Don't quit.
Well, that's a great message in many cases. Just keep trying, just keep trying, just keep going, keep going, keep going, keep trying harder. But sometimes we need to back off and say, I'm not going to quit, but I'm not also just going to keep trying harder, expecting different results. Extraordinary benefits accrue to the tiny minority of people who are able to push through, just trying harder, a tiny bit longer than most. On the other hand, Seth Godin says, the cul-de-sac, sometimes we're in a cul-de-sac, French for dead end. And it's so simple, it doesn't even need a chart. It's a situation where you work and 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 you push and you try, and nothing much changes. It doesn't get a lot better. It doesn't get a lot worse. It just is. That's why we call those dead end jobs dead end jobs. And the message of this book, and I think wisdom in this case, stick with the dips that are likely to pan out, quit the cul-de-sacs to focus your resources on what is possible to work out. There's an old Dakota tribal saying that says, when you discover that you're riding a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount. Well, there's a third question we ought to ask, and that is, should we try something different? That's what these men did. When they could not find a way to do this, they didn't quit. When they could not find a way to do this, they didn't keep trying to do the same thing, expecting different results. When they could not find a way to do this because of the crowd, they didn't blame the crowd. They went up on a roof. They lowered him on his mat, through the tiles, into the middle of the crowd, right in front of Jesus. One book I read in, a long way from finishing it, but I read a chapter or two in this book, few chapters. Do one thing different, which is what I see these men doing in this particular case. Just notice what isn't working, change the patterns in some small or some dramatic way to change your life. Explanations, that's what we tend to want. We say, why is this happening? Why are these people being so rude? Why won't they let us through? Why can't we get to Jesus? Well, those explanations may be helpful, and they give us an illusion of help by enabling us to understand why we have a problem, but not giving us a concrete way to actually solve that problem. These systems of explanation can lead to a victim culture. They could have gotten in a victim culture. They could have gotten in the culture of blaming the crowd. That rude crowd, those rude people, those people won't let us in. The reason we can't help our friends is because those people, they're the problem. And we can get into a victim culture of blaming somebody else, and it's as old as the Garden of Eden. At any rate, these systems and explanations can lead to a victim culture in which we focus on damage done to them in childhood or in the current relationship or something somebody else did. The result is a tendency to blame others, again, as old as the Garden of Eden, and look outside ourselves for solutions. They could have done that. They could have said, you know, these rude people, they need to get out of the way, and so on. To turn experts or self-help books and groups, skip it down a bit. Some people with dyslexia, however, They grow up magically to be successful writers. Even though they've got somebody to blame, they could blame their lack of success on their dyslexia, but somehow magically they become successful writers. Some shy people become actors or public speakers. Some abused people have fine, live, and paraphrase just a bit here. Some abused people have fine and live, go on to live happy lives. They haven't let psychology or ideas about what is wrong with them dictate the course of their lives. They've taken a solution oriented approach to life, focusing instead on what they can do to improve the situation. Any slide in this deck of slides illustrates what these men, it's this what did. It's this slide right here. These men took a solution oriented approach to life, focusing on what they could do to improve the situation, which in this case was to get a ladder. The solution oriented approach, modeled by these men, focuses on the present and the future and encourages people to take action and change their viewpoint. The past is important in the sense that it has influenced us and brought us to where we are today, but letting it determine your future is a mistake. Instead, this approach, this solution based approach these men followed, this approach suggests acknowledging the past and then getting on with changing things. One way to solve a problem, then, is not to analyze why the problem arose. Why are these people being so mean? Why can't we get through this crowd? Why won't they let us through? But to change what you are doing to solve it. The way to do this is to determine how you keep acting in the same way over and over again, the problem pattern, and begin to experiment. That's the key word, experiment with doing something different, breaking the pattern. This can work even when the problem is another person, as was the case in this case. The problem was not them, the problem was the crowd. The problem was other people, and they could have spent all day blaming that crowd, explaining the crowd, and trying to understand the crowd and so on. For if you change your part of an interpersonal pattern, the other person will often change as a result of your change. Whenever you are stuck with a problem, ask 3 questions. Should I quit? Should I try harder? Should I try something new? When you are stuck with a problem, maybe you need to try something new. Do something. Just one thing. Name of this book. Do one thing different. Just one thing different. Do something different as they did. Break the pattern of the problem. Insanity, this classic quote, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. Now the good part, I want to invite you to discuss these truths together. I believe the real life change is going to happen in the next half an hour or so when you discuss these truths together. I've come up with some questions. You may come up with some questions of your own. Don't feel obligated to slavishly answer each one of these questions. I just want to stimulate a good discussion about the model that these men provide for us and how we can ask these 3 questions. And if you're watching this, by the way, on YouTube, here's what I want to invite you to do. I want to invite you to find a couple of friends that you can get with and watch this video and discuss these truths together. And may God richly bless you as you discuss this passage together.